In the previous video, we started talking about fundamental conditions for the teams. And we discussed compelling mission as one condition, and we also talked about required skill set to deliver value. And in this video, we'll try to focus on feedback and focus. So let's start with feedback. What you mean by feedback, and why teams need that?
Well, I think there are two important parts with why feedback is important. One has to do with motivation, and the other has to do with the ability to adjust and deliver more value. If you're working on something and you're not getting any feedback, it's difficult to get a sense of appreciation or a sense of importance. How do you know it matters what you're doing if no one is there to say that here are some great things, here's not what's working, we need to change it this or that way. If you're not getting any user adoption metrics, how do you know that it matters? So the motivation goes down.
From whom do we need feedback?
I think from a number of sources. I mean, it's helpful to have feedback from the actual customers, the people who are using whatever it is you're building, and the people who are paying for it, and they're not always the same. From the organization in terms of the value you're creating. But it's really essential to have that to steer so that you can make course corrections. But I think the point you raised about motivation is really important. I think there's a big disconnect in a lot of organizations where they say what you're working on is important, you have to work hard because it's important, but then no one seems to ever show any interest in the actual product. I mean, nobody's waiting for it, nobody comes to see it. And so that mixed message, I think, is damaging to teams. It's because it kind of feels like you're asking us to work really hard, but it sounds hollow because apparently there's no one who wants to take the time to look at what we're doing.
Why do you think organizations find themselves in a situation of giving mixed messages and saying, yes, it's important, but maybe it's not really important, or customers are not finding this important enough?
I think there is a number of different reasons. Recently I ran into one place where the reason was that they didn't have the technical infrastructure to follow up on the user adoption. That could be a reason, even though it's quite uncommon. I think it's more common that the company cultures are start more work, finish more, just do stuff rather than measure your impact on the customers or the organization.
I think part of it is we have a big old hangover from mechanistic thinking. That there's this idea that you write a specification for something and then you hand it to people and they should work on it diligently, following their little tasks without having that human interaction or having the knowledge of how their work really affects people. So I think that's part of the reason that we see this so often, is that we still have kind of a hangover from that way of thinking about work. And I actually sometimes hear people say, oh, I would never let my developers talk to a customer. It's well, how will they understand how their work fits into the customer's life? How will they understand how the customer actually uses this product? Yeah, this is a concept in social theory about whole work. And when people know how their work fits into a bigger picture, it's inherently motivating, right? Whereas, if I'm just a dishwasher washing dishes and that's all I see, that's not very motivated. But if I'm part of a kitchen that's building beautiful food or creating beautiful food for people, it's really a different sense.
When we talk about feedback, I know a lot of teams would find themselves in a situation that they perceive that they receive enough feedback, both maybe from organizations or from customers, and it could be that they receive feedback from customers through other people in the organization, that there are filters.
I think the first question is, do I know someone who uses this product?
And when was the last time I got feedback from that person?
Yeah. Have I ever watched them using this product? I mean, those are two simple questions. Do I know anyone who uses this product? When was the last time I got feedback from them or I talked to them?
You could also, and like in our grooming meetings and planning meetings, do we talk about impact on customers? Like how we, because if you don't know, how are you going to follow up? So that's also one way to discover if you have a problem. And the second thing you were saying?
Perceptions. Oh, about filtering?
When you perceive that you deliver value, that is valuable, but is this really valuable? And is this really valuable on all the levels for all the stakeholders you mentioned that you would like to get feedback as customers, organization, internal stakeholders probably?
I think what happens often is that the people who are actually developing software products are so divorced from the people who are doing it that the proxies begin to feel like they're just, they're being sort of arbitrary or dictatorial. You know, it's like, since there is no grounding in how the product is used, I mean, obviously this is not true every place, but when there is no value in how this product is often used, then it can feel arbitrary when people make decisions about this is what you should work on and this is what you should build.
Do you have any simple tips for people who find themselves in a situation that they need to start acting on feedback from customers and they identify some of the symptoms that we just now discussed?
Go visit. If you can, go visit.
Yeah.
Who should go and visit? The whole team?
Go visit or invite users and stakeholders. Invite them to demos, open demos, do closed demos. That's one way to get feedback. If they want to start thinking about value and feedback earlier in their process, they could start with stuff like impact maps. That's a way to start thinking about like, and having it in their grooming meetings or in their planning meetings or when they create roadmaps.
Yeah.
So that's two parts of the process, like in the beginning or in the end. Put together everyone in a room and just say, what have we learned about our product in the last month? That's another way, like have a retro about it.
Sure, you know, and if you can't have contact, maybe having some personas helps.
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps people get a sense of who might be impacted, and then start asking your product owner and your manager, you know, how is this product doing in the market? You know, what features do people like? And maybe if you start asking those questions, it will generate some more questions in other people's minds and start getting some more information about how your product fits in other people's worlds.
The second fundamental conditions we wanted to discuss was focus. So where will you scope that? What do you mean by focus?
There are two things we mean in focus, I think. One is getting uninterrupted time. As a team member, do I have the possibility to focus on my work, or am I getting interrupted constantly? Interruptions are very damaging for creative work. I was working with this one team who was sitting close to the entrance of an office, and every day at around 9, at around 12, at around 4, people would come and leave for lunch. And so they would not get any work done for an hour because they would get interrupted every 5 minutes. But then there's also the other part, which is focus in terms of work in progress, like limiting how much work they're doing at the same time. So both of these are equally important.
Sure, and it's, I think most people recognize in their real lives that if you're working on 14 different projects, not much is going to get done. I mean, most people who have tried any kind of home repair projects, they don't do 14 things at once. Most people don't. Or if they do any kind of crafts, they knit or something, they don't do 14 projects at once because they realize nothing will ever get done. But somehow that, that fundamental understanding doesn't translate to work sometimes, and people believe that, you know, if you're not constantly busy, you're not accomplishing something. And it's actually the opposite. If you don't have focus, if you don't have limit, you're not likely to accomplish much. And I think that's it's a problem with not just interruptions, social interruptions, but requests for work. You know, can you just fix this or fix this thing for me? Or the manager comes in and says, I just need you to answer this one question, but it really takes like 20 minutes and some research. And So that makes it really hard for people to make any forward progress. You can actually grind a team to a halt with interruptions.
Where should people start with working with creating more focus or creating an environment for more focus for teams?
I find sometimes just tracking the interruptions is the first step, is to figure out exactly how many interruptions you get in a day.
And what type?
What type? Yeah, I mean, me coming to Viktor and saying, hey, can you help me with this, understand this piece of code that you wrote, is one sort of thing that you don't want to discourage, right? But, you know, extraneous requests coming in outside of the product backlog or those sorts of things. It's just useful to get a handle on them. You can't just say, don't interrupt people. That generally has some unintended consequences or negative consequences. But I find that just doing a simple, you know, back of the envelope calculation of interruptions is real helpful.
When it comes to interruptions and personal space, it can also be individual. How much disturbance one individual would experience with interruptions and with somebody coming in and asking, and for one person it could be even once a day, somebody coming in with something else is asking for help would be interruption, and disturbance would be experienced as a big disturbance, and for somebody even casual chats would feel absolutely good and even pleasant.
So that's why, I mean, you can't distinguish in advance which interruptions and how many are good or bad, if to use those terms.
Well, but I was struck by one of the examples you gave, which was if one interruption to give help feels like too much, then I think working in a collaborative endeavor is going to be tough. Right? I mean, sometimes there is work that requires absolute focus, but most people can't maintain that focus for 8 hours a day, right? So, you know, there's an ebb and flow to focus in that sense. But if, and this is taking your example to the extreme, if you have someone who views any interruption as depressing their productivity, whether it's helping a colleague or having a conversation about the work you're doing, then I wonder if working in a team environment is a great fit. Have you ever run into that sort of thing?
I've run into something similar, but it wasn't one interruption. It was when one specific type of interruption happened. That person's day would be ruined. And eventually this person left that company. It didn't happen often. It happened once every month or once every 2 months. We tracked this. But it was so harmful for this person's just emotional stability. It was a roller coaster for him every time it happened, so he left eventually. But he didn't have any problems with helping his colleagues with day-to-day issues. So somewhat...
Sounds like an interesting story there.
In my experience, the level of disturbance would also be influenced by the way you are being approached when you're being interrupted.
Sure.
And that is on individual level can be different thing. And then it's for teams to have that conversation, to talk of if I get interrupted, how would I prefer those interruptions to reach me, and then even opening up and starting a discussion about it, how much is okay, and what would be my preferred way of being interrupted. Maybe somebody wants
some
to have
team
focus
agreements about how we handle interruptions with each other, which is a little different from interruptions from the outside, right? But you can also make agreements on how to handle those.
Yeah, some teams implement goalie systems.
Yeah, sure.
So that's one way.
So I'm going to take the interruptions today.
Yeah.
That's my day, being interrupted.
Is there anything else you would like to add on the topic of focus before we start rounding up this video?
I think focus is a hugely untapped potential. Like just doing less and reducing interruptions is a way to very quickly, like over a day or two, increase motivation and productivity substantially. So this is it's a very cheap way to make a big difference for a management team, or a set of product owners, or a set of, you know, project managers, or whatever type of organizational steering you have.
So yeah, and it doesn't mean that people can't talk to each other and they have to be just focused, head down, doing their work. It means that they have the time to focus as a unit, a team, a collaborative unit on their work, free of a lot of external interruptions, and without, you know, having, you know, 18 different things in progress. You know, just to pick a number. You know, work on one thing, get it done. Work on another, get it done. Yeah, that would make a huge difference for a lot of companies.
And for those who would like to learn more,
She has a blog.
Viktor's blog.
Visit Esther's blog.
good.
So thank you so much for taking the time to interview us.
Yeah, it's been
Thanks.
great. It was super helpful.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. Thank you.